When I walked into that high-profile charity gala as Marcus Thompson's wife, his ex-girlfriend Isabella made sure everyone knew I didn't belong there, calling me a small-town nobody who trapped a billionaire. But when Marcus stood up at the podium and announced something that made the entire room gasp, everything changed forever. The secret about our relationship that had been eating at me for months was about to shock not just the elite crowd in that ballroom, but the entire nation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma, and 6 months ago I was living what most people would consider an ordinary life in the small town of Cedar Falls, population 8,000. I worked as a high school English teacher, lived in a cozy 2-bedroom house that belonged to my grandmother, and spent my weekends reading novels on the front porch swing or volunteering at the local animal shelter. I drove a reliable but aging Toyota Camry, shopped at the discount grocery store, and considered a dinner at the local diner a special treat. But that simple life was about to collide with a world I never imagined I'd be part of. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my car broke down on Highway 9, about 20 miles outside of town. I was coming back from a teachers' conference in the state capital when smoke started pouring from under my hood. I pulled over to the shoulder, rain pelting my windshield, with no cell service and no idea what to do. That's when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up behind me, and out stepped the most handsome man I'd ever seen in real life. He was tall with dark hair, wearing an expensive suit that somehow looked perfect even in the rain, and he had the kind of confident smile that made my heart skip a beat. The man introduced himself as Marcus Thompson, and he insisted on calling a tow truck for me and giving me a ride back to town. During that 40-minute drive, we talked about everything from books to travel to our dreams for the future. Marcus was charming, intelligent, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone who clearly had money. He asked thoughtful questions about my teaching career and seemed genuinely interested in my small-town life. When he dropped me off at my house, he asked if he could take me to dinner sometime, and something about his genuine smile made me say yes without hesitation. What I didn't know at the time was that Marcus Thompson was one of the wealthiest men in the country. He owned Thompson Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar corporation with interests in everything from real estate to technology to renewable energy. He had homes in New York, Los Angeles, and London, a private jet, and a social circle that included celebrities, politicians, and royalty. But during our first few dates, none of that mattered. We went to the local pizza place, took walks along the river that ran through town, and spent hours talking in my grandmother's old kitchen while I cooked simple meals from scratch. Marcus never made me feel like my life was small or insignificant. Instead, he seemed fascinated by the sense of community in Cedar Falls, the way everyone knew each other's names and looked out for one another. He loved hearing stories about my students and their dreams, about the town's annual harvest festival, about the way the sunset looked different from my front porch every single evening. For the first time in what he later told me was years, Marcus felt like he could just be himself, not the billionaire CEO that everyone wanted something from. 3 months into our relationship, Marcus finally told me the truth about his wealth and his business empire. I was shocked, of course, but it explained so many little things I'd wondered about. The way he never seemed worried about money, his expensive watch and perfectly tailored clothes, the fact that he always seemed to be taking important phone calls. But by then, I had fallen in love with the man who helped me grade papers and laughed at my terrible cooking attempts. Not the billionaire everyone else saw. We decided to keep our relationship quiet, partly to protect my privacy, and partly because Marcus wanted to hold on to the peace he'd found in our simple life together. But Marcus's world had other plans for us. His business required him to attend high-profile events, charity galas, and social functions where he was expected to have a date. After 6 months of trying to balance both worlds, Marcus asked me to marry him, and despite my fears about fitting into his elite social circle, I said yes. We had a small, private ceremony in Cedar Falls with just our immediate families present, and for a few weeks, I thought maybe we could make this work. Maybe I could be Mrs. Thompson in public and still be just Emma at home. The first major test came when Marcus was invited to speak at the Metropolitan Children's Hospital Annual Charity Gala, one of the biggest social events of the year. The invitation specifically mentioned that spouses were expected to attend, and Marcus gently explained that this would be my formal introduction to his world. I spent weeks preparing, buying my first designer dress with Marcus's help, practicing walking in heels higher than anything I'd ever worn, and researching the other attendees so I wouldn't embarrass myself in conversation. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror in our hotel suite, barely recognizing myself in the elegant navy blue gown and professional hair and makeup. Marcus looked devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, and when he told me I looked beautiful, I almost believed I could pull this off. But my confidence started cracking the moment we walked into the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel. The room was filled with the kind of people I'd only seen in magazines. Celebrities, politicians, business leaders, and socialites who moved through the crowd like they owned the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Almost immediately, I noticed her, Isabella Rodriguez, Marcus's ex-girlfriend. She was everything I wasn't. Tall, stunningly beautiful, with the kind of effortless elegance that money and breeding can create. Her red dress probably cost more than my annual salary, and she wore confidence like expensive jewelry. Marcus had mentioned her briefly during our relationship, explaining that they dated for 2 years but broke up because they wanted different things from life. What he hadn't mentioned was how breathtaking she was, or how every man in the room seemed to gravitate toward her magnetic presence. Isabella spotted us almost immediately, and glided over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Marcus, darling," she said, air kissing his cheek while completely ignoring me. "You look wonderful as always. I was hoping we'd run into each other tonight." Her voice was smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an accent that made her sound even more sophisticated. Marcus politely introduced me as his wife, and I watched Isabella's perfectly sculpted eyebrows raise slightly in what might have been surprise or amusement. "How lovely," Isabella said, finally acknowledging my existence with a look that managed to catalog and dismiss my entire appearance in about 3 seconds. "And what do you do, Emma? Are you in business as well?" The way she asked made it clear she already knew the answer, and found it amusing. When I explained that I was a high school English teacher, her smile became almost predatory. "How refreshing," she said in a tone that suggested anything but refreshment. "It's so important to have educators in our society. Such meaningful work, even if it's not particularly lucrative." The insult was delivered so smoothly that Marcus missed it entirely, but I felt every word like a physical blow. Around us, other guests were beginning to notice our conversation, and I could see the curious looks and whispered comments starting to spread. Isabella seemed to sense blood in the water, because her next comment was even more pointed. "I imagine the transition from small-town life to this world must be quite overwhelming. Marcus always did have a protective streak when it came to people who needed guidance." Before I could respond, Isabella's attention was claimed by a group of her friends, all of whom looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. As she walked away, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Can you believe Marcus married a teacher? She looks so ordinary. I give it 6 months before he comes to his senses." Each comment felt like another small wound, and I began to understand why Marcus had been so protective of our private life in Cedar Falls. The evening continued with a series of subtle but unmistakable put-downs from Isabella and her circle. During the cocktail hour, she made sure to monopolize conversations about art, travel, and business, topics where her extensive education and worldly experience gave her every advantage over my small-town background. She would ask seemingly innocent questions that were actually designed to highlight my inexperience. "Emma, have you been to the Met's new exhibition? What did you think of the market volatility last month? Are you familiar with the work of this particular artist?" Each time I had to admit ignorance, Isabella would smile sympathetically and change the subject. But the worst moment came during dinner, when Isabella was seated directly across from Marcus and me at our table. The conversation turned to charitable causes, and Isabella launched into an eloquent discussion of her work with several international organizations. She spoke knowledgeably about global poverty, educational initiatives in developing countries, and the complexities of sustainable development funding. It was clear she was brilliant and passionate about her causes, and I found myself genuinely impressed, despite my growing dislike of her tactics. Then Isabella turned her attention to me with that same predatory smile. "Emma, as an educator, you must have thoughts on the literacy crisis in rural communities. What innovative programs have you implemented in your district to address these systemic challenges?" The question was a trap, designed to make me look incompetent in front of the table full of influential people. My small-town high school didn't have the resources for innovative programs. We were lucky to have enough textbooks for all our students. My work was important and meaningful, but it wasn't the kind of large-scale, internationally recognized effort that would impress this crowd. I fumbled through an answer about working with individual students and community partnerships, watching Isabella's smile grow wider with each word. "How wonderful," she said when I finished, her tone making it clear that she found my efforts charmingly quaint, but ultimately insignificant. "It's so admirable when people work within their limitations." The other people at our table nodded politely, but I could see the pity in their eyes. They saw exactly what Isabella wanted them to see. A simple, small-town teacher who was clearly out of her depth in her husband's sophisticated world. Marcus tried to steer the conversation in different directions several times throughout the evening, but Isabella was relentless. She had clearly made it her mission to establish that I didn't belong in this world, and she was succeeding brilliantly. By the time dinner was over, I felt like I was shrinking smaller and smaller in my chair, painfully aware of every way I didn't measure up to the elegant, accomplished woman who had once been the love of Marcus's life. The final blow came when Isabella cornered me in the ladies' room during dessert. Away from the crowd and Marcus's protective presence, she dropped all pretense of politeness. "You know this won't last, don't you?" she said, touching up her perfect lipstick in the mirror. "Marcus thinks he wants this simple life fantasy, but eventually he'll realize what he's given up. Men like him need partners who can match their ambition, who understand their world. You're a lovely girl, Emma, but you're not built for this life." I wanted to argue, to defend myself and my marriage, but her words hit too close to my own fears. I had seen how effortlessly she moved through this world, how naturally she commanded respect and attention, how perfectly she seemed to complement Marcus's success and ambition. Standing next to her in that elegant bathroom, wearing my first designer dress and feeling like I was playing dress-up, I began to wonder if she might be right. When I returned to our table, I was quiet for the rest of the evening, lost in my own thoughts and insecurities. Marcus noticed my mood change and kept asking if I was okay, but how could I explain that his ex-girlfriend had just systematically demolished my confidence without sounding petty and jealous? Instead, I smiled and nodded and counted the minutes until we could leave. But the worst was yet to come. Marcus had been asked to give a speech about his company's charitable initiatives, and I knew Isabella would be watching every moment, waiting for me to prove once again that I didn't belong by his side. As Marcus stood up to walk to the podium, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "This one's for you." I had no idea what he meant, but something in his voice made my heart race with both hope and terror. Whatever he was about to say would change everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the entire country to learn the truth about who we really were. As Marcus walked toward the podium, I could feel Isabella's eyes boring into me from across the room. She was sitting with her group of sophisticated friends, all of them wearing expressions of polite interest mixed with barely concealed anticipation. I knew they were waiting for Marcus to give some standard corporate speech about charitable giving, after which they would continue their evening of networking and subtle social warfare. But something about the way Marcus carried himself as he approached the microphone made my stomach flutter with nervous energy. Marcus took his time adjusting the microphone and looking out over the crowd of nearly 500 of the city's most influential people. The ballroom fell silent, with only the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the rustle of expensive fabric breaking the quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear and confident, but there was an emotional undertone that I'd never heard him use in public before. "Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here tonight supporting the Metropolitan Children's Hospital, an organization that has touched countless lives in our community." He paused, his eyes finding mine across the crowded room. "But tonight I want to talk to you about a different kind of giving, a different kind of impact that one person can have on the world. I want to tell you about my wife, Emma." The mention of my name sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd. This wasn't the typical corporate speech they'd been expecting, and I could see people sitting up straighter, their attention suddenly laser-focused on Marcus and his words. Isabella's expression had shifted from bored politeness to sharp attention, and I felt my heart begin to pound. "6 months ago, I thought I understood success," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "I had built a billion-dollar company, owned properties around the world, and moved in circles where success was measured purely by financial achievement and social status. I thought I was living my best life. But then I met a woman who taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch and the difference you make in your community. Marcus went on to tell the entire ballroom about our first meeting on that rainy highway, but he told it in a way that highlighted my character rather than his rescue. He talked about how I'd been returning from a weekend conference where I'd been learning new teaching techniques, not because my district required it, but because I cared enough about my students to spend my own time and money improving my skills. He described how, even stranded on the side of the road, I'd been more concerned about missing my Monday morning classes than about my own inconvenience. Emma teaches high school English in Cedar Falls, a town of 8,000 people that most of you have probably never heard of, Marcus said, and I could see some people in the audience exchanging glances. But in that small town, she's changing the world, one student at a time. In her 8 years of teaching, she's helped 73 students get into college, many of them the first in their families to pursue higher education. She's personally tutored struggling readers on her own time, bought school supplies with her own money, and created an after-school writing program that has been adopted by districts across 3 states. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes as Marcus continued to share details about my work that I'd never thought were particularly noteworthy. He talked about the nights I stayed late to help students with their college applications, the weekends I spent chaperoning academic competitions, and the way I'd fought the school board to keep the arts programs funded when budget cuts threatened to eliminate them. But that's not all, Marcus said, his voice taking on an even more emotional tone. What you don't know about my wife is that she's been quietly funding a scholarship program for the past 5 years. Every year, she takes a significant portion of her teacher's salary and creates full scholarships for students who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford college. She's sent 18 kids to university so far, and she's done it without any recognition or fanfare because that's not why she does it. The revelation sent a wave of murmurs through the crowd. Isabella's face had gone pale, and I could see her friends looking confused and impressed despite themselves. I had never told Marcus not to share this information, but I'd never expected him to announce it to a room full of strangers. The scholarship program was deeply personal to me, something I'd started after seeing too many bright students give up on their dreams because their families couldn't afford college tuition. Emma could have married any number of wealthy men who would have showered her with material possessions, Marcus continued, his eyes never leaving mine. Instead, she chose to spend her life investing in other people's futures. She chose substance over status, impact over image. And when she agreed to marry me, she made me promise that our wealth would never change her core mission of helping others achieve their educational dreams. Marcus paused for a moment, letting his words sink in before delivering what I realized was going to be the most shocking part of his speech. Which brings me to why we're really here tonight. The Metropolitan Children's Hospital has been asking for a major donor to fund their new pediatric education wing, a facility that would provide tutoring, educational support, and college preparation services for young patients who are missing school due to their medical treatments. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on Marcus's every word. I could see the hospital's board members leaning forward in their seats, hope and anticipation written across their faces. I'm thrilled to announce that Thompson Enterprises, in partnership with the Emma Thompson Foundation, yes, my wife has already started her own foundation, will be donating $50 million to not only build this educational wing, but to staff it with the best teachers and educational specialists in the country. But here's the part that makes this truly special. Emma will be personally overseeing the program design and implementation, ensuring that every child who walks through those doors receives the same quality of educational support that she's been providing in Cedar Falls for the past 8 years. The ballroom erupted in applause, but I was in complete shock. Marcus had never mentioned anything about starting a foundation in my name, and $50 million was more money than I could even comprehend. I watched as people throughout the room stood up, clapping enthusiastically, their faces showing genuine respect and admiration, rather than the polite tolerance I'd been receiving all evening. You see, Marcus said as the applause died down, I learned something important from my wife. Success isn't about accumulating wealth for yourself. It's about using whatever resources you have to lift others up. Emma has been doing that her entire career, with her teacher's salary and her own sacrifice. Now we have the privilege of doing it together on a much larger scale. But Marcus wasn't finished. I also want to address something that's been bothering me all evening. I've watched some people in this room treat my wife with condescension and dismissal because she doesn't come from wealth or social status. To those people, I want to say this. Emma has accomplished more meaningful work in her 8 years of teaching than most of us accomplish in our entire careers. She has shaped young minds, opened doors for disadvantaged students, and invested her own resources in other people's futures without any expectation of recognition or reward. Isabella's face was now completely red, and she was staring down at her lap. Several other people in the room were also looking uncomfortable, clearly recognizing themselves in Marcus's description. "My wife doesn't need to prove herself to anyone in this room," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a steel-like quality that I'd never heard before. But apparently some people need to be reminded that true nobility comes from character and service, not from inherited wealth or social connections. Emma Thompson has more class, integrity, and genuine accomplishment than anyone I've ever met, and I am honored, not embarrassed, not settling, but truly honored, to be her husband. The applause that followed was thunderous, and this time, it felt different. People weren't just clapping politely. They were showing genuine respect and admiration. I could see several prominent businessmen and their wives nodding approvingly, and even some of Isabella's friends looked impressed, and perhaps a little ashamed of their earlier behavior. But Marcus still wasn't done. "There's one more thing I want to share with you tonight, something that I think perfectly illustrates the kind of person Emma is." Last month, one of her former students, a young woman named Maria Santos, graduated from medical school. Maria was the daughter of migrant workers, and Emma not only helped her get into college, but personally mentored her throughout her entire educational journey. Maria is now starting her residency in pediatric oncology right here at Metropolitan Children's Hospital. Marcus gestured toward a table near the front of the room, where a young Latina woman in an elegant black dress was standing and waving, tears streaming down her face. "Maria asked to be here tonight specifically to thank Emma publicly for changing her life. But here's the thing. Emma has 18 more students like Maria who are currently in various stages of their college and graduate school journeys, all because she believed in them when no one else did." The camera crews that had been quietly documenting the event were now focused intently on both Marcus and me, and I realized that this speech was going to be broadcast and written about far beyond this ballroom. Marcus had just told the entire city, and potentially the entire country, about our relationship and my work in a way that would forever change how people viewed both of us. So to anyone who thinks my wife doesn't belong in this world of wealth and influence, you're absolutely right. She belongs in a much better world, a world where success is measured by the lives you improve rather than the money you accumulate. But since we're stuck in this world together, I'm going to make sure that every resource at our disposal is used to continue the work she's been doing all along. As Marcus returned to our table, the entire room rose in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. People were crying, including several hardened business executives who probably hadn't shown emotion in public for decades. Isabella had disappeared from her table, and I later learned that she had left the event entirely, unable to face the dramatic reversal of the evening's social dynamics. But the most amazing part was what happened in the days and weeks that followed Marcus's speech. Video of his remarks went viral on social media, with millions of people sharing clips and commenting on the powerful message about true success and authentic love. News outlets picked up the story, not just covering the $50 million donation, but focusing on the broader themes of service, education, and the value of teachers in our society. Within a week, I was receiving calls from educational organizations across the country, inviting me to speak at conferences and consulting on scholarship programs. The Emma Thompson Foundation, which Marcus had apparently been setting up as a surprise, was flooded with donation requests and partnership opportunities. Teachers from around the world were reaching out to share their own stories of quietly changing lives, inspired by the recognition that their work truly mattered. The response was overwhelming, but it was also deeply validating. For years, I had wondered if I was making any real difference in the world, if my small-town teaching job was meaningful in the broader scheme of things. Marcus's speech and the global response to it showed me that impact isn't measured by the size of your stage. It's measured by the depth of your commitment and the authenticity of your caring. 3 months later, I was invited to give the keynote address at the National Education Association's annual conference, speaking to over 10,000 educators from across the country. As I stood at that podium, looking out at an audience full of teachers who had dedicated their lives to serving others, I realized that Marcus's speech at the charity gala had done more than defend me against Isabella's attacks. It had shown the world that true nobility comes from service, not status, and that the most powerful person in any room is often the one who has dedicated their life to lifting others up. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.